Hi everyone and welcome back. Now in today's video again we are going to discuss about an important topic in Terraform, which is remote state data source. Now from what I have seen, in any medium to large scale organization, remote state data source based feature is extensively used, and hence it is important for us to understand the benefit that this provides. So with this, let's get started. Now, before we look into what exactly this feature provides, let's look into a typical challenge, post which we'll look into the solution-based approach. Now, let's assume that you have multiple large-scale organizations, and in each organization, there can be multiple different teams that are working on different infrastructure resource. Now, when you have a medium to large-scale organization, you will not have a single team managing everything. So, there are multiple teams that are managing different aspects of infrastructure. For example, you might have a networking team, you might have a security team. Now let's assume that both of these teams are using Terraform to manage their respective infrastructure. So networking team is responsible for managing the public IP addresses that are used as part of the organization. Security team, they are taking care of all of the firewall rules in the organization. So going back to the networking team, as we were discussing that all of these teams are using Terraform to manage the infrastructure. So whatever public IP addresses that gets created, it will be created through Terraform. Now, whenever you create an infrastructure resource through Terraform, we know that the state can be either be stored locally. So the terraform.tf state file. So it can either be stored locally or it can be a remote state where you can store the state file in various options like console, S3 and so on. So here the networking team, whenever they create the public IP addresses through Terraform, they are storing the terraform.tf state file remotely in a S3 bucket. Along with that, you also have some kind of a output values as part of the code. So whenever the code gets created, there is output values that are defined, which basically lists down all of the public IP addresses that are created. So this is the basic setup. Now let's go ahead and look into the challenge. So it can happen that a security team wants that all of the IP addresses that are created by the networking team should be whitelisted as part of the firewall. So what you want is the Terraform code that the security team is creating, it should go ahead and connect to the S3 bucket where the terraform.tf state file of the networking team is stored, and it should fetch all of the IP addresses that are part of the output values and whitelist them as part of the firewall rules. Alright, so this specific approach where a Terraform code which is managed by a different team needs to connect to the remote backend to fetch the values from the TF state file can be achieved using the remote state data source. Now before we look into the actual demo, let's look into what needs to be achieved as part of this setup. So the first step here is that the code from the security team project should connect to the terraform.tf state file that is managed by the networking team. This is one important part. So whatever Terraform code that security team is creating needs to have the appropriate access to the S3 bucket of the networking team and needs to have a logic where it can look into the TF state file and fetch this specific output values from it, and it can whitelist it. Alright, so the part 1 is to go ahead and connect to the S3 bucket that is managed by the networking team. Second is the code should fetch all of the IP addresses that are part of the output values. This is something that we were discussing. And third is the code should be able to whitelist this IP addresses in firewall rules. Now, in larger organizations, it is not necessary that it would be public IP address and the firewall rules. There can be n number of dependencies where some information needs to be fetched from a remote state file, which is being managed by a different team by itself. So when you have such kind of a scenario, the remote state data source proves to be very important. So with this said, let's go ahead and have a quick demo to understand how this structure works. Now for today's demo, I have two folders that are available. You have the networking team folder and the security team folder. Now if you'll explore the networking team folder over here, you have two files, backend.tf and eip.tf. Now in fact, let me also quickly show you the workflow through Visual Studio. So you have two folders, networking team and security team. As we know, networking team is responsible for creating the public IP addresses. Now, if you look into the networking team folder, you have a file called as eip.tf. What it is doing, it is creating a simple elastic IP address, and you have the output values that are defined where whatever IP address that gets created is added as part of the output values. A very simple code that is added here. You also have one more file called as backend.tf. What does this file does? Basically, you have a remote backend that is defined. The backend is of type S3. So whatever Terraform.tf state file that gets created, it does not get created locally. It gets stored in a remote backend of S3. And it is basically in this S3 bucket, which is KP Labs team networking bucket, in a file called as eip.tf state file. Now at this stage, I have already created the resource. So if I'll quickly do a Terraform plan, you will see that it should ideally show nothing to change. Let's verify this. As expected, it says no changes in the infrastructure. So this basically means that the EIP resource is already created. Now, if we'll also look into the S3 bucket of KP Labs team networking bucket, you see that we have one file called as eip.tf state where the actual state information is stored. Now, if I'll quickly open this file, you will see the exact contents where a specific elastic IP address is created. Where it is created in the US East 1 region, which is North Virginia. In fact, let me also quickly show you this to avoid any sort of confusion. So in the North Virginia region, if I'll go to elastic IP, you see I have one elastic IP address that is created with 255.36. And the same thing that you will see over here, which is 255.36. So this is the EIP resource. And because we have also added the output values here, whatever elastic IP address gets created will be outputted. And this is the reason why if you look into the state file in the outputs under the EIP_ADDR, it is also showing you the value. So this is the quick way to identify what is the IP address associated with the resource of EIP. Alright, so this is one part. So at this stage, the first part that we are seeing of networking team is something that we have explored at this stage. Now the second part, as we were discussing, whatever firewall rules or whatever security group rules that the security team is managing and creating, those rules must go ahead and whitelist the IP addresses that are part of the eip.tf state, which is this specific file. So whatever IP addresses that are present over here should be whitelisted. Now there are two ways to achieve this. Some might do a copy paste. So they'll do a manual approach where whatever EIP address is present, they'll copy it. They'll manually add it as part of the security group rule and they'll do a Terraform apply. However, this is not the best approach because tomorrow if the EIP address changes, again, you'll have to manually go ahead and look into the TF state file, fetch the new value and so on. So this is a very manual approach and not at all recommended. The better approach is some form of automation in your code which can automatically connect to the S3 bucket, fetch the value and whitelist this. So let's look into the second part here as well. Now we are not going to look into the code associated with the second part because then our practical video of this specific topic will become less interesting. So I'm going to show you the demo on how exactly the overall connection works. So I'll go to the security team and let's go ahead and open up the terminal. Now again, just for information, if I can show you, in the security team, I have a file called as sg.tf, which is basically used to create the security group and the associated rules. Now, if I'll go ahead and do a Terraform plan at this stage, you will see that it has automatically picked up the IP address of 3.209.255.36. Let's in fact verify 255.36 and it is whitelisting as part of this. And in fact, even if you had looked into the output, one of the first thing that it is doing is it is using the Terraform remote state to fetch the IP addresses from the output values that are part of the S3 bucket. Now, in case if you might be wondering that this specific value is hard-coded and it is not actually fetching it from a remote state, let's go ahead and also experiment it. So what I'll do from the networking team, I'll go ahead and I'll do a Terraform destroy with auto approve. We'll go ahead and we'll create a new elastic IP address and we'll see if the newer IP address gets fetched by the security team when we do a Terraform plan. Alright, so this specific EIP address is now destroyed. I'll clear the screen. I'll do a Terraform apply with auto approve. Again, note that this is a demo video. We are going to look into this practically in detail in the next video. So first, let's understand the concepts from a theoretical point of view. As expected, this time a new EIP got created. This time the IP address starts from 34.193. Now, in fact, let's go ahead and open this once again. As expected, in the output you see we have 34.193. So now from the security team, so if you see we are in the security team, earlier it had this specific IP address. I'll clear the screen. I'll do a Terraform plan. And this time you see it has automatically picked up the newer IP address from a state that is being managed by a different team. Alright, so I hope with this you understood the overview about what this feature is trying to achieve, and this is the reason why the name also it quite matches remote state data source. So this data source connects to a remote state. It can be of same team, it can be of different team, and after connection it can fetch the value and those values can be used as part of your Terraform configuration. So that's a very high level overview. Again, we are going to discuss about this practically in more detail in the next video, and with this we'll conclude today's video.